Have you ever been in a conversation where you can tell the other person isn't listening? It happens all the time. We all need to grow in our listening skills, especially when it comes to faith-based conversations.
Jesus had this teaching. He'd often say, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." Jesus can actually teach us how to listen to him and to others so that people become curious about who he is. Ears to Speak is about inspiring spiritual curiosity through listening.
We're your hosts, Maddison Bertunis
and Jessica Leapvik. Maddison, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you like fish?
No.
So
That's a terrible question.
That's an example.
I actually do like fish, so I don't know why I said no. Was I supposed to be honest?
You should have been honest. Today we're going to be talking about asking good questions to have great conversations about spiritual things. So obviously, do you like fish is not a great question.
Why is it not a good question?
Because fish is disgusting and everyone should say no.
It's close-ended?
It's
Is
close-ended.
that how you would describe it?
Exactly.
Yes,
it's a yes or no
yes
question. Yeah. So we're going to talk about how to ask open-ended questions so that you can go deeper in your conversation. So, Maddison, can you give me an example of a good open-ended question?
I was just thinking about conversations that I've had with people where I keep asking closed-ended questions, trying to get the conversation going somewhere, and it doesn't, and those are just the worst.
Yeah, you feel like you're beating your head against a wall.
Yeah, that's pretty much what you're doing.
Yeah.
But a good question. Let's go back to the fish question.
Fish. We're talking about fish today.
Instead of being
on
like,
Ears to Speak.
Instead of being like, do you like fish? You could say either what type of fish do you like, or what types of foods do you like?
Yeah, make it more general.
That opens it up.
And if I say fish, then you could follow it up with
what type?
What type of fish do you like? Yeah, those are both really good questions. So that's even a good point of like, good questions spark good follow-up questions as well.
Right.
So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be talking about more than fish. We're going to be talking
I
about
hope so.
fishers of men. Oh, sorry guys. That was a really
such a dad joke.
That was a really bad Jesus Christian pun.
Okay.
But we are going to be talking about asking good questions and how asking good questions in spiritual conversations or any conversations can really help grow our friendships and grow us in getting better at talking about significant things like faith issues. So we hope you enjoy it and ask some good questions.
We hope you enjoy it.
We hope you enjoy it. On this episode, we are talking about questions and how can you go from normal everyday conversation into having a conversation about spiritual things. I think that can trip up a lot of us because we don't want to feel like a weirdo. It's suddenly like inserting Jesus into the conversation when we've been talking about like donuts or something. So we're just going to talk through some things that have been helpful to us in helping to bring up spiritual things with friends and with strangers. We realize the power of questions. And so we just, Maddison, I want to ask you, like, when has been a time in your life where somebody's asked you a really good question that's made you think about things in a different way, has caused you to, like, self-reflect or just challenged you to just pause and think about things?
So, first of all, I really want a donut now. You brought that up.
That does sound really good.
And so, yes.
Sorry.
I think that for me, I'm usually the person who's asking the questions because I love asking questions of people because I love hearing about who someone is. And I think the best way to do that is to ask them questions. And so in my experience, when someone is asking me questions, it always means a lot.
Yeah.
Because I'm usually the question asker. Yeah. And so, I mean, anytime someone asks, like, how can I pray for you? That means a lot to me. One situation that's popping up in my mind is when I was complaining about something to one of my friends. I don't even remember what it was about. And he just said to me, so Jesus isn't enough for you?
Oh, dang. He totally Jesus juked
you. He did. But
so it was more of a rhetorical question.
Yeah, it was. But it was what I needed to hear in that moment. And he cared enough to ask me that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a bold move.
It is.
To just say that to someone.
And you have to have a relationship with someone to say things like that.
Right.
It's not like he walked up to you at the Starbucks and was like,
you don't need this latte?
Yeah.
You just need Jesus.
Enough for you? Come on.
Yeah. But it was what I needed to hear in the moment. It was appropriate.
Sure.
And it made me think, oh, you're absolutely right. Jesus is enough for me.
Yeah. So why do you think it makes you feel good to have somebody ask questions? Because you said you're normally the question asker. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you see that do in the people you're talking with, or how do you feel when somebody starts asking you questions about yourself?
It makes you feel cared for. A lot of people love talking about themselves.
Yes. Let's talk about my favorite subject, me.
Which is why I think asking people questions for me is so successful.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think that because people are so used to other people talking about themselves, that when they are asked the question, it's almost like, oh, they're soaking it in and forget to ask you a question back. Yeah. And that's always been my experience in conversations with people. Mm-hmm. But I'm okay with that because I enjoy learning about someone else. Yeah. So like I said, when I'm asked the questions back, I appreciate it because I feel cared for and that person really wants to know that thing about me.
Yeah. I mean, because really, like, in some ways, the art of conversation is a dying art because we text, we Facebook message, we get to the real pragmatic stuff, or we just feel like we have to kind of vomit our stuff all over people because we're so worried that we're just never going to get a chance to share about things. So, yeah.
What about you? What's an example of a time when someone's asked you a good question and it's meant a lot?
I mean, my husband asks me really good questions that make me stop and think and sometimes feel a little angry because I'm like, grr, I don't want to talk about this. But one of my friends, Leslie, she's probably one of the best question askers I know. And like you mentioned, a lot of people are surprised when you ask them questions because I think in conversations, most people are either thinking about what they want to say in response to someone or like a clever, witty rebuttal or...
Which then they're not really listening to you.
You're just thinking about yourself and what you want to say. Or even like, the awkward one-upsmanship of like, oh, like, I had this great vacation, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, well, I, went on this cruise and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So...
And we're all guilty of that,
we do that.
But yeah.
But to have someone kind of hold back from that and just say... wow, tell me about that experience. Like, I want to hear more. Or what was that like for you? Really does make you feel cared for and that you matter and the person's actually interested.
Especially with women, too.
Oh, yeah.
I think because we are all so competitive with one another, whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who, she is always complimenting women. And it catches me off guard because I'm like, oh, you're not this jealous person. Like, you're just genuinely happy for other women. And that's so cool. Yeah. But I know you were going to talk about a woman who has had a good impact on you in that way. So if you want to.
Yeah. Well,
her.
Just, just to respond to that, the insecurity, I think a lot of us feel like, who am I to talk about anything? And so, I don't know, we kind of fill the air with what we think is important or good. So, yeah, I remember hanging out once with my friend Leslie and our 2 kids, and we were just outside taking a walk, and I was telling her about something I was really struggling with. And instead of her just saying, boy, that's really hard, or bummer, that's difficult, she just stopped and asked me, like, wow, how are you dealing with that? Or, do you feel supported from your spouse or your community? Or what are some challenges that this problem presents? And it was amazing because she didn't try and fix me. She didn't try and problem solve. She just listened and asked good questions. And it made me, I think it just gave me the courage to stop and think like, yeah, I don't need to freak out about this because I can just take a moment to stop and pause. So I've been really grateful for her in my life. So
that's good.
Yeah. And I think especially as we think about people who are far from God or are spiritually curious or, have never really experienced Christianity, or have had really bad experiences with Christianity, you and I have both found that question asking is one of the most caring things we can do just to demonstrate Jesus to others. We were talking about some scriptures just where we saw this being true for Jesus, that he's like the master question asker.
Yes.
And so especially looking at the Gospels is a great way for us to discover, how did Jesus do this? How did he get to those places with people? So we were looking at Matthew 16, and this is verses 13 through 16. And it says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And this is when Jesus brings the good question. He says, but what about you, he asked. Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Even in that brief passage, we see Jesus asking his disciples, the general, like, what's the word on the street? Like, what are people saying about me? Who do they say that I am? And then he brings it really personally to, what about you? Who do you say that I am? Not leaving it as an abstract thing of like, what do you think about God? But I'm a real person that you need to respond to. And so I think that's where we are hoping to get to in a lot of our conversations of like, how do you respond to this, Jesus? And what has that been like for you in your life? So
yeah, I love how Jesus asks a lot of questions, and he's God. So a lot of times when he asked questions, he knew what the answer was going to be, but it wasn't about that. It was about getting his disciples and the people who were listening to him to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's the other element of asking questions that I love, is that when you ask someone a question, it makes them stop and think.
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus would answer a question with a question a lot of time in scripture. And when I've done that in conversation with people, it really helps them to think, oh, why am I really asking this question? And what do I think before I'm going to ask it of someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does make you stop and pause. So what are some good questions that you use in helping to transition the conversation into spiritual things? And I'd love to hear a story about what that looked like for you.
Yeah. My husband always says, like, I don't understand you. People just tell you their life story. Like, you don't even, like, strangers, they'll just open up to you. And honestly, my secret is that I just ask people questions and I listen to them.
Yeah.
And that's so refreshing for people. And so if I am sitting down having a conversation with a girlfriend, let's say she doesn't know Jesus, or she's, not really sure what she believes about God, or if she believes in God, and I've gotten to know her, our whole conversation is going to basically be about me asking her questions. So that I can get to know her more. Yeah. But at the
because
point,
you actually care about her and want to know her story.
I care about her. And it's when people think about evangelism and those conversations, a lot of time people think of apologetics, and people think of, I need to have an answer and I need to be ready and I need to make sure that these people are convinced of what I believe. And that's the total wrong approach here.
That's not what we're talking about.
So what we're talking about is a relational conversation where you're caring for that person and you want them to also discover things about themselves that maybe they didn't even think about before. Yeah. And so, like I said, when I'm in that conversation with a woman, and we've gotten to that part in the conversation where I feel like, hey, I think I could probably ask her about some spiritual things. And usually at this point, she shared something with me that's pretty difficult that's going on in her life. Yeah. Like, she's realized that I'm a safe person, that I actually care about her. And so she is saying, you know what? My husband just told me 2 days ago that he wants a divorce. Right. And this actually happened to me the other day. Yeah. I was getting to know this woman and she just laid that on me. Yeah. And of course, that's heartbreaking. Yeah.
So you stop and acknowledge the pain. Like, it's not like just, oh, bummer, but like, man, that's a hard thing. So
right. Yeah. And then asking her, how are you coping in this situation? Yeah. And I think that that's a really important question to ask, because sometimes people don't even realize how they're coping. Right. Because they're just coping.
They're just coping, and they're just kind of responding without stopping to think about, like, hey, is this helping me? Is this helping me deal with the problem? I mean, like, for me, one of the things I've been discovering is how much I am an emotional eater. Like, I I'm stressed out. Like, we've sat in your office, been in meetings where I'm like, where are the M&Ms? Like, I need M&Ms. And, and then I stop and think like, oh man, I was stressed out. And my response was to go to this rather than something else. And, obviously everyone has their go-to things. Some are healthier than others, but we all try and figure out ways to cope with difficult things.
So when I'm really stressed out, the way that I cope is stress cleaning.
Man, I am so jealous of you.
Or just staying busy so that I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of the response that I get is I just work, I'll overwork myself, or I will, just stay really busy doing other things, hanging out with friends so that I don't have to deal with this issue.
Yeah, the pain or the sadness or the confusion. Yeah, I know. And I think for women too, like depression is such a significant issue. And just, for me having struggled with depression, like sometimes it's just checking out and numbing yourself. And I think, for us to even ask the question, like, how are you coping with that difficult situation, helps people to just stop and see like, okay, this is happening, whether they want it to or not. They may not even realize, like you said, that's happening. So
number one way I numb out is go scrolling through my phone. And I think a lot of people do that. Or I'll just watch some chick flick show on Netflix and binge on it for like, I haven't watched Kardashians in a long time, but they're one of my guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
For sure. Don't judge me.
I'm not judging you.
No, I was talking to our audience.
Oh, hey guys, don't judge Madison. If you're a Kardashians watcher too, we're not judging you.
No judging.
Nothing but
here.
love. Nothing but love.
So, getting back, after I ask that question, how are you coping? And I get various responses. Sometimes I'll ask, have you tried praying?
Mm-hmm.
Because whether that person believes in God or not, people pray. I mean, especially when you're in a desperate situation.
Yeah.
Even if the prayer sounds like, God, are you even there? Can you show up?
Yeah.
That's still...
Or God, why are you doing this to me?
Right.
Like,
yes.
Why are you letting this happen? Yeah.
So that will tell me a lot about where that person is at or what they think about prayer. And also, while I'm asking these questions, I'm watching body language, facial expressions.
Sure.
If
they're crossing their arms and like frowning, like,
right,
maybe
or if
not
they
going there.
if they seem caught off guard by that question, I'm not going to keep going deeper with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop. You just have to be really present with that person.
And you're listening to them and to the Holy Spirit of like, okay, obviously that touched a nerve. And so the compassionate thing to do is like, wow, hey, I'm sorry if that question caught you off guard. Like, I want to get to know you, but if you're not comfortable talking about that, that's totally fine. So giving people outs as well, like giving them permission, like to share what they're comfortable and not comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's another thing for another day, but
yeah.
And I think the thing I love about prayer too is you don't have to be any religion to pray, or you could be any religion, and pray. That it's just kind of a thing that people acknowledge is a spiritual way to connect, regardless of what you believe. And somebody could not be a Christian, not be churched, and still want to connect to, something divine, something, a higher power, whatever they might call it. And that's a great sign that God's working in their life, that they're trying to find a way. So you'll ask, after they've shared something hard, how do you cope with this difficult thing? And then, have you ever prayed? What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah.
Anything else that you usually ask people?
So depending on their response to that, have you ever prayed question, asking them, did you see anything happen after you prayed? Or I'll say, what was it like growing up in your family?
Mm-hmm.
Was your family religious or spiritual? Were you a part of a certain religion?
Yeah.
And that'll take you even deeper, obviously, because you're hearing exactly their experience in their family.
Yeah, you're not having to guess.
You're not guessing.
They are straight up telling you.
And it doesn't seem like a weird next question to ask because you've led up to this slowly.
Right.
And again, always being in tune with how they're feeling.
Their body language.
That kind of thing. And then after that, if I feel like it's okay to ask them, I'll say, well, who do you believe Jesus is now? Mm-hmm. Because for me, I mean, I grew up going to church my whole life. Sure. I believed in God, but Jesus wasn't
it's this question of, what Jesus asked Peter, who do you say that I am?
Who do you say that I am?
Not just the general, but like you, Maddison Bertunis, who do you say that I am?
Yes. So, and I didn't decide who Jesus was in my life until I was in college on my own.
Yeah.
So those are a few questions that have really helped me.
Yeah.
And what about you?
That's great. Yeah, I think I've had a lot of similar experiences. And one of the things you're talking about is, what does this look like with friends or people we have relational connections with? And I think these questions can be with friends or with strangers or just getting to know people. So a lot of times, if it seems appropriate and the person seems comfortable and we've established enough of a connection, whether I'm meeting them for the first time or going deeper in a friendship, I'll ask them, what's your spiritual background? Similar to the family question, but leaving it a little bit more general of, hey, that could be anything. It could look like you have magic crystals or you believe in Thor or, I have no idea. I'm just curious and I want to know. And that gives them enough of a space to share openly. And usually that gives me a really great insight. If they share oh, I grew up Catholic, but I really don't believe that anymore. Or my family was Buddhist and my family still goes and makes sacrifices to our family altar or burns incense. That just gives me a picture of what spirituality has meant to them in their life. So that's a big one. Another one I like to ask friends or strangers is, what's been your experience with Christians or the church? And let me tell you,
get
girl,
ready for those answers.
Woo, worms, can of worms. Worms are coming everywhere. Yeah, I mean, ask. Sorry, I'm such a weirdo.
I love it.
Ask anybody that. Ooh, you are bound to get in a good conversation. And
so when you ask that question, you really do, all jokes aside, need to be ready for what they might say.
Yeah.
So, Jessica, if someone answers with a really horrible experience that they've had in a church or with Christians, how do you typically respond to that?
Yeah. Well, because we're all people who are broken in need of a savior. It's not surprising that people have had painful experiences with church or Christians or religion because we're people and we hurt each other. Sometimes people will share general things it was okay, but, I felt like I could just never really ask questions. And so I just wasn't interested. But a lot of times with people, there's some significant relational hurt there. Someone making them feel stupid, or even in sadly extreme cases like sexual abuse or betrayal of father or mother seeming like a godly person, but being a different person at home. And a lot of times I try and do what Jesus does, is just listen to them and acknowledge the places of brokenness and pain. And many times I'll just say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the ways they've been hurt. I'm sorry for the ways they've been treated. I'm sorry for the pain that they've experienced. Even though I'm not the person who's caused the pain, if I'm empathizing and listening and caring for them, that hurts me too, because they're a person loved by God, created by Him, who has experienced the pain and brokenness of this world. And I think it's always appropriate to just apologize and say, I'm so sorry.
I agree.
I remember I was at a wedding once and got into this conversation with a guy who was there with his boyfriend. And my husband and I had a really nice time talking to them all evening. I think because, we had just been at a wedding service, we started talking about spiritual things oh, that's interesting that, they got married outside even though she grew up Catholic, or, things like that. As we started having this conversation, it came up that he had been in a campus group that when he shared he was gay, they kicked him out. And obviously just tremendous wounds there of feeling rejected and abandoned and judged. And I wasn't one of those people in that group. That had happened years and years before I'd met him, but I still was just conscious of okay, if I claim to be a Christian, that's my family. And my family has hurt this guy. And so I just apologized and said, I'm so sorry. That's really painful.
What was his response to your apology?
It was kind of crazy. He teared up a little bit and was oh, it's not your fault. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it was really painful. And he kind of laughed it off too. Wow, yeah, that really messed me up on the religion thing. And so I think those places too, of asking questions, but then being willing to listen and apologize, goes a long way with people, because you're not coming in as having all the answers. You're coming in as, I actually care about you, and I'm willing to hear the places of pain and brokenness.
You're not just defend that person or say, oh, well, they probably didn't.
Yeah, not to justify it. Not at all. And then I think too, like one of the big things I've learned is just to affirm people and to tell them like, I'm so sorry that happened. I just want you to know that God loves you and Jesus cares about you and he sees that and that causes him pain. We will always experience pain and brokenness this side of eternity, but to apologize, but to also continue to point people to Jesus and say, that's not his way.
And that's a good point, Jessica, because unfortunately, when people have bad experiences with the church or with Christians, they portray that onto God.
That's right.
Because if this is my experience with quote, quote, godly people, then their God must be this way.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no outcome that's worse because that can send people into years of pulling away from experiencing who Jesus is and just dismissing everything. Yeah. So I think that's a great response. And what's another question that would be good to ask them after that?
I've had experiences with these questions, and then there's also been some helpful resources for me. So
great.
My friend Bo Corsetto wrote this book called Beyond Awkward when talking about Jesus is outside of your comfort zone. And he actually has a list of questions in the back of the book that are just like conversation starters. And one of the questions that he asks, I think that's really helpful, is what does spirituality look like for you now? Or that experience was really painful. Are you still interested in spiritual things? Or have you explored Jesus or faith at all? Because then it gives insight too into where have they gone from there? Are they still stuck in that place of anger and sadness or fear? Or are they saying like, man, that sucked, but I still want to know God. I still want to know about what, the Bible is all about or religion in general. So asking, what does spirituality look like for you? Or if it's just totally off the table for them. And so it gives me insight into the starting place where they're coming from.
That's good. And what I love about asking questions is that it makes the conversation seem so natural.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily preparing all of these questions beforehand, even though you can have them in the back of your mind, but you really want to be in tune with that person because it'll make the conversation all that more natural. I mean, your friend telling you that he was kicked out of this group because he admitted he was gay, he's opening up to you.
Yeah.
He thinks you're a safe person.
Right.
So for you to continue asking those questions of, wow, how did that affect you? How does that affect your spirituality now? That's not
a pretty normal thing to ask.
That's
like
not a pushy
question.
Evangelistic conversation. That is caring for that person and getting to know where they're at,
and empathizing.
Which is a natural flowing conversation. And there are so many times I would bet that person walks away thinking, wow, I've never had that productive of a conversation about God before.
Yeah.
And just walking away feeling very surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we could continue talking about this because
all day.
Because there's a lot of great questions you can ask. And you might even just stop and think, like, write down some of your own questions. Guys, this is not that hard. It's just learning to, like, listen, ask a few good questions, and then responding to friends. And today, we'll have some of these questions in the show notes so you can look over them and we'd really challenge you and encourage you. And we're praying for you that you'd take a step of faith and just start asking some of these questions because we know that Jesus is going to show up and that he's moving. He's moving and active in the lives of your friends and wants to bring you the joy of helping them to connect with him. So thanks for listening today.
Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Ears to Speak today. If you liked what you heard, please go and subscribe to our podcast, review it, share it with a friend, and we would love it.
Show us some love. And if you want to get in contact with us, if you have any questions about the show, just want to drop us an encouraging note or
a critical note.
We receive those too. We also receive cookies. You can send us an email at connections@stonecroft.org. If you want to find out more resources about how to share your faith, you can go to stonecroft.org and check that out as well. Thank you so much for listening today, and we're looking forward to connecting with you again.